June 4th, 1944. It's raining in Normandy. The weather is so bad that people can finally leave their basements and shelters. There are no Allied planes in the sky, no bombing. The Germans can go on leave, confident that there will be no attempt at what they call the invasion. Their leader, Field Marshal Rommel, says, "There is no likelihood of an Anglo-American landing in the coming weeks." Rommel decides to return to Germany for his wife's birthday, June 6th. He hopes to see Hitler and convince him to send reserve armored divisions to reinforce the Atlantic Wall. Rommel has flooded the countryside behind the beaches, creating a death trap for Allied paratroopers. For the locals, it's Normandy's worst rain in 20 years. On the other side of the channel, the Bedford boys are stuck in their ships, like thousands of other first-wave Allied fighters, all awaiting anxiously while French soldiers train under the North African sun for another landing in Provence, planned to immediately follow: Normandy. Back in rainy England, the Commander-in-Chief, General Eisenhower, despairs. At last, the Weather Service sends him an improved weather forecast for the following day, June 6, 1944. Eisenhower seizes the opportunity. He makes the most difficult decision of his life. He gives the order for the Great Assault. At 5 p.m. on June 5th, London's BBC radio broadcasts the second part of the fateful message in France.
Blesse mon cœur d'une langueur monotone.
The long-awaited continuation of Verlaine's poem. Everyone understands. This is it. They're coming. The resistance springs into action, unearthing the weapons delivered by the British paratroopers. Like the Sten, a submachine gun too light for the Germans' heavy weapons. 20,000 FFI, French forces of the interior, will die during the 3 months of fighting for the liberation. In Normandy, the message that dice are on the carpet spreads through the farms and markets. Along with "It's hot in Suez." The order to cut all lines of communication to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the landing beaches. For the most extensive amphibious operation of all time, the Allies have chosen the long sandy stretch of the Normandy coast between the Cotentin Peninsula and the confluence of the Seine. It's still June 5th, and on airfields in southern England, mechanics finish painting large white stripes on all aircraft. These invasion stripes will help avoid mistakes and gunfire between allies, an unavoidable risk when 10,000 planes are in the air at the same time on the same day. 5,000 fighters, 3,000 bombers, and 4,000 gliders will carry 23,000 paratroopers. Eisenhower comes to reassure the paratroopers, who will be the first to jump in Normandy to protect the flanks of the D-Day beaches. He explains that now is the best time. The moon is full. They'll have good visibility at night. The paratroopers casually call him Ike. A Texan tells him, "Don't worry, I'll find you a job on my ranch after the war." Hitler says of the Americans, "They're just a bunch of guys with no roots." The Führer is in his mountain chalet, the Berghof, for the wedding of his mistress's sister. He says, "The Americans cross the Atlantic to make money. These are people who flee immediately. They won't resist a hard blow." Yet Hitler, who conquered Europe, has just experienced an uninterrupted series of defeats, and German cities continue crumbling under the bombs. The American paratroopers are 20 years old. They are all volunteers. They're weighed down by their 90 pounds of equipment, the parachute, weapons, grenades, and food. Many of them will drown from the weight of their parachutes on the land flooded by the Germans. They will jump at midnight. The British and the Canadian paratroopers follow, most of them transported in these big gliders made of wood and canvas. They travel with their motorcycles, jeeps, and guns, giving them mobility and firepower. They're waiting for the signal to leave. Tonight. In the great port of southern England, the last of the embarking infantrymen are saluted by Churchill. With his trademark cigar and his famous V for victory. He tells his wife, Clementine, "Do you realize that by the time you wake up in the morning, 20,000 men may have been killed?" Among them in the 1st Commando are 177 young Frenchmen who escaped their Nazi-occupied homeland. Like Gwenelle Bolloré from Brittany, Chaplain Abbot René de Nauroy from Paris, or Hubert Four from Dordogne. France is sewn on their English uniforms. They joined the convoy on the choppy sea for the long channel crossing, from June 5th to the 6th, 1944. It's a very emotional moment for Gwenelle Bolloré, who writes, "The immense fleet, as far as the eye can see. Boats, thousands of boats, over 5,000 of them. Overhead, giant anti-aircraft balloons create a strange, almost childlike spectacle. On board the American ships, the mood is heavy. One of the Bedford boys, 20-year-old John Barnes, says, "I often thought at the time, why did we go? We were lining up like sheep off to the slaughter that we knew was ahead. What forced us to obey when our heads, hearts, and feet wanted to go no further? Was it the fear of military discipline? Was it patriotism, love of flag and country? We laugh and joke, but it was fake. Everyone was scared. We didn't want to lose face." As the convoy advances, the reality of war fills everyone's mind. Everyone remembers their colonel's last words of wisdom. "There is one certain way to get the enemy out of action, and that is to kill him. War is not child's play and requires hatred of the enemy. Remember, the Hun is a crafty, intelligent fighter and will not have any mercy on you." A strange sluggishness overcomes the convoy, the calm before the storm. Those in the first group finally realize they will land tomorrow at dawn. As expected, the moonlight favors their parachutist comrades, who are about to jump into the center of the German defensive line. The moon also reflects on the mountain where Hitler hosts Nazi dignitaries and their wives to listen to one of his favorite composers, Johann Strauss. And to reassure himself by discussing the secret weapons that will change the course of the war. At 3 in the morning, Hitler decides to go to bed. He takes a sleeping pill and orders, "Do not wake me for any reason." June 6, 1944, 12:15 a.m. The liberation of France begins with the dropping of 15,000 American paratroopers over Normandy. As soon as they pass the coast, the flak, the terrible German anti-aircraft artillery, opens fire. Sergeant Zane Schlemmer, 19, later says, "I thought of 2 things: to get out of this plane as quickly as possible, and I wondered how I'd gotten myself into such a mess." The Germans don't understand that this is the invasion. Total confusion ensues. Paratroopers from the 82nd are mistakenly dropped on the village of St. Mary-Église. The 101st Division scatter across the flooded terrain at Harekâtın. There are already many losses, but those who survive must accomplish their mission: prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. 1 a.m. on June 6th, the British paratroopers board their gliders. They take off clumsily, sometimes in pairs, towed by Dakotas, the king of wartime transport planes. The British 6th Airborne must neutralize the German battery at Merville and secure the English and Canadian beach flanks. After a harrowing channel crossing, a glider pilot, 19-year-old Sergeant Stanley Pearson, recounts, "We've been training for 6 months for this first and last engineless flight, and it was like a hot knife sinking into butter. Once we'd reached the target, all we had to do was unhook the cable and descend, heading for a sort of crash, as controlled as possible, but a crash nonetheless." Posted in a German artillery bunker, Lieutenant Steiner recalls, "From my battery at Melville, I saw a contraption. I couldn't understand how it could fly." He frantically calls his supervisor. Steiner thinks it's the invasion, but nobody takes him seriously. Through his binoculars, he sees dozens of gliders crashing to the ground. But not all of them. English soldiers emerge from the gliders and head off into battle. But who will believe Steiner? The Germans in the region are accustomed to unleashing their flak, the anti-aircraft defense system, on Allied bombers, who ravage the countryside while avoiding hitting the beaches so as not to reveal their true objective. The Normandy locals don't know what awaits them. "4 a.m. Allied paratroopers hold the beach flanks. The French get ready on their ship. Hubert Four says, "Our leader, Commandant Kiefer, warned us. There will be many casualties. I wouldn't blame those who don't want to go. Nobody chickened out. At that age, you're not afraid of dying." Chaplain René Noir writes, "I've never seen men so ready to die and so close to God." But for many, seasickness masks the fear. a British commando, Cliff Morris, says, "We felt so ill that we'd rather have been dead." At dawn, in a bunker on the Normandy coast, Commander Pluscat calls the other officers. He says, "It's the invasion." He wakes his superior. His voice trembles. "There must be 10,000 ships." The huge Allied fleet now stretches 50 miles between the Havre and Cherbourg. The telephone switchboards at the German headquarters suddenly buzz with activity. Marshal Rommel is still in Stuttgart. He won't have time to celebrate his wife Lucia's birthday with his son Manfred. He jumps into his powerful car. It's a 10-hour drive. He keeps telling his driver, "Faster, faster." He adds, "I was right. If I had the 2 armored divisions from the Pas-de-Calais, I could push them back in 3 days." He focuses during the trip, punching his fist into his palm, saying, "I'm going to see my best enemy, Montgomery." British General Sir Bernard Montgomery had defeated Rommel in the desert. He now commands the D-Day land forces under Eisenhower, the Allied forces' supreme commander, who orders a great naval strike on the German defenses of the 5 Normandy beaches, where tens of thousands of men will land in successive waves. Suddenly, within the Allied fleet, the ships of the Free French naval forces let the Marseillaise blare from their loudspeakers. Aboard the Montcalm, a cruiser, Admiral Joseph proclaims, "We have the honor of firing first. We must fire on our homeland. This is the price we must pay." Facing the Allied ships, the Germans flee to their bunkers. Among them, 18-year-old Franz Gockel is on the front line in a fortified hole above the beach at Colville-sur-Mer. The code name for this beach is Omaha. Along with Utah, it is one of the 2 American sectors. At 5:50 a.m., the Navy opens fire. Franz Gockel recalls, "It was a raging inferno, huge drum rolls, shrapnel flying everywhere, whistling and screaming. I was so scared, I kept praying to God." The beach is codenamed Gold and Sword for the British and 1 French commando, and Juno for the Canadians are pounded by the Royal Navy. The order to start the offensive is given at the same time as the naval raids. British and American soldiers move from large transports to landing craft. Captain Armelino of the 16th U.S. Infantry Regiment recalls, "With the rough seas, it was a traumatic experience. My men had already landed in Sicily, but this was terrible. Guys were breaking both ankles. We lost craft that flipped over with their men. One of America's greatest writers, Ernest Hemingway, then a war correspondent, witnesses the barge's departure. In the gray early light, the 36-foot coffin-shaped steel boats took solid green sheets of water that fell on the helmeted heads of the troops, packed shoulder to shoulder in the stiff, awkward, uncomfortable, lonely companionship of men going to a battle. It will take them an hour to reach the beach, Famous photographer Robert Capa is with them. An officer, Colonel Taylor, tells him, "This will be the most challenging time, when we are the most vulnerable. But it's up to us to open the door." While the British and Canadians pile into their landing craft, the Royal Marines recover their heroic combat divers. During the night, they planted explosives underwater in the German minefield to open passageways for the landing craft. These explosives will be remotely detonated at 6 a.m., simultaneously with the massive aerial beach raid. "5,000 tons of bombs are dropped in half an hour. Can the Germans survive such a deluge of fire? At 6:25 a.m. on schedule, the Bedford Boys barge approaches Omaha Beach in Colville-sur-Mer. Everyone on board is sick, and the stench is unbearable. Roy Stevens tells his twin brother Ray, "I'll meet you late morning on the road above the beach." British Second Lieutenant Jimmy Green, steering the barge, says, "The silence was chilling. Some German gunners have survived, like Franz Gockel." He says, "I opened fire with my machine gun." Gockel massacres the Bedford Boys, like Roy Stevens' twin brother Ray. 19 of the 34 who came from Bedford, Virginia to liberate France die in the first minutes of D-Day. German machine gunner Gockel says, "My pal Siegfried fires his cannon at the advancing tanks. Gockel adds, "The Americans march to their deaths like robots. The beach is covered with dead and wounded. I keep shooting until an American grenade blows my fingers off." He manages to reach a German aid post. He says, "When I saw my fingers hanging from their ligaments, I was filled with joy. For me, the war was over." Another soldier takes his place. They have orders to hold out until they have no more ammunition. 8 a.m. Landing barges circle under enemy fire. The assault waves of soldiers roll out in succession. Walter Halloran from Hollywood disembarks with his 12-pound camera. He films this image of dying men that will go down in history. He says, "I immediately put the reel in a small bag, attached to my personal carrier pigeon, and sent it to England." Robert Capa disembarks too. He writes in his memoirs, "The camera trembled in my hands. It was a new kind of fear shaking my body from toe to hair." His most emblematic photo is of 21-year-old soldier Houston Riley taking a hail of bullets. Capa comes to his rescue. Houston Riley will live to be 90. These images testify to Capa's courage and the Americans plied on Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach is under German fire from the Pointe du Hoc. Utah Beach is also threatened. At the Pointe du Hoc, the Rangers, elite soldiers, attacked the cliff at the cost of heavy losses to neutralize German machine gun nests and bunkers, already severely damaged by naval artillery fire. The 4th Infantry Division can now land without significant difficulty at Sainte-Marie-du-Mont on Utah Beach before marching on to Cherbourg. One of Operation Overlord's 2 objectives. Cherbourg. The Americans must take this major port, crucial for transporting reinforcements and supplies. The British land simultaneously on the beaches codenamed Gold, Sword, and Juno to march on the Normandy Gateway Caen, and then to Paris. Juno is reserved for the 3rd Canadian Division, who crossed the channel in the corridor cleared of mines by divers, near Curceau and Vers-sur-Mer, 2 charming vacation towns. An automatic camera fixed to the barge records this footage, shown here in its entirety. This is an exceptional testimony to the fear and anguish of these sacrificed young men. The Canadians will lose 1,000 men, either killed or wounded. The shock commandos now disembark. Dutch, Norwegians, Danes, Poles, and Yugoslavs. They must advance under enemy fire, backed by the Royal Air Force's Spitfires. But the German threat is still there. In this hell, the French commando lands on the beach at Ouistreham, codenamed Sword. There are 177 of them, mostly sailors from Brittany who fled France in 1940. Their leader, Lord Lovat, tells them in French, "You're going home. You'll be the first French servicemen in uniform to beat the crap out of those bastards." They have been supplied with bicycles to make them more mobile. Many are tossed aside immediately. Hubert IV recounts, "I crossed the beach. There was a bunker 150 feet away. I fired in the openings. Remember, a bullet that goes in can spin around inside. After the seizing of the fortified Riva Bella Casino, emotions run high when they meet the first French. The locals immediately provide Calvados brandy and valuable information about the Germans, whom they have come to know well over the past 4 years. The D-Day landings don't change Hitler's plans. He meets the new Hungarian Prime Minister, Dome Stoye, to ask him to speed up the delivery of Hungary's Jews, stubbornly protected by his courageous predecessors until now. Over 400,000 ill-fated people board the death trains to Auschwitz. Some survive, considered fit for work by Nazi doctors in the selection process upon arrival at the camp. But for the German High Command and General Jodl, the real emergency situation is the Allied landings in Normandy. Behind Jodl, his deputy, General Verlemont, writes, "I was surprised by Hitler's relaxed attitude. Unlike his generals, he was overflowing with confidence. He told us, 'Now we have them where we can beat them.'" Hitler explains to his entourage, Himmler and Göring, that this is an Allied ruse and that the real landing will occur in the Pas-de-Calais. As a result, he refuses to commit the 2 armored divisions requested by Rommel. And yet, the Allies are making progress along the Normandy beaches. But at times with difficulty, like here, in front of Aeromanches on Gold Beach. The British 50th Motorized Division, which had already survived the debacle at Dunkirk, has gotten stuck in the mud, and many of its tanks are destroyed along with their crews. One commando, Cliff Morris, writes, "Bodies were strewn all over the beach, some legless, armless, headless. The moans and cries of the dying mingled with the screeching bullets and the whine of the shells." General Lord Lovat writes, "At high tide, there was so much blood in the water that a sticky deposit accumulated on the soldiers' boots. On Omaha Beach, in the area near the cliffs, the battle is far from won. The Americans are blocked by fire from above. The dead pile up. The tide rises. The landing craft drift, and the Rangers try to rescue the last survivors. The Rangers also have to evacuate the wounded in the storm, whose blood flows inside the barges. Aboard a hospital ship, Martha Gellhorn is a war reporter like her husband, Hemingway. She writes, "There comes a time when you feel so small and helpless in the immense demented nightmare that you don't care about anything." While the men on Omaha seek protection, the Rangers have managed to climb the slope and attack the German positions. They are backed by Battleship Texas. They finally occupy the position where Gockel had been stationed with his machine gun. They capture some Germans, but for the Americans and the British, who survived the bloodbath on the beaches, there's no need to take prisoners. After 10 hours of fighting, the beaches are now in Allied hands. The next step is to march on Cherbourg and Caen. In this single day of combat, the Allies count 10,000 dead or wounded, and the Germans just as many. The men continue to disembark, division after division. an uninterrupted stream. 150,000 of them will be thrown immediately into battle. The French have been waiting 4 years for this moment. They hear General de Gaulle's voice on the radio from London.
La bataille suprême est engagée. Après tant de combats, de fureur, de douleur, voici venu le choc décisif. Le choc tant espéré. Bien entendu, c'est la bataille de France et c'est la bataille de la France.
An increasingly difficult battle for civilians. Despite Allied Air Force leaflets warning of raids. Leave immediately. There's no time to lose. 15,000 locals will die in the Allied bombing raids. An intense debate over the merit of these bombings breaks out among the general staff. The Air Force commander, British General Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory, says, "I have had all sorts of pressure put upon me. Perhaps only 25% will achieve results, but even that will have been worth it." The enthusiasm of the local population takes a severe hit, like this cafe owner who is reluctant to show her hospitality towards the liberators, called Liberty Killers by the remaining German sympathizers. A great writer of the day, Georges Duhamel, addresses the Allies. Nothing is more painful than to be wounded by one's own friends. Sirens and alerts resonate day and night. All the cities are destroyed. Like Vire, Condé-sur-Noireau, Le Havre, Saint-Lô, Falaise, Coutances, Lisieux, Rouen, and above all, Caen. On June 13th, 7 days after D-Day, the Allied forces come together on the beaches. Despite the bombings, Montgomery is halted in front of Caen, which he was supposed to take on June 6th, and is only 8 miles from the beaches. British and Canadian tanks prove far inferior to German tanks. Hitler has finally committed his reserve divisions. But for Rommel, it's too late. He knows the battle is lost because of Hitler. But he still tries to stop the Allies by all possible means. A month later, he is gunned down on a road, seriously wounded, and evacuated. Hitler stiffens when he hears that Stalin is unleashing his offensive in the east as planned. Transferring forces from Normandy is out of the question. The Americans successfully cut through the Cotentin Peninsula and lay siege to Cherbourg. The large port is vital for reinforcements and supplies. Hitler had ordered the garrison to hold out until death. But 39,000 Reich soldiers surrender, leaving behind port facilities totally out of commission. So the two Mulberry artificial harbors provide the first supplies. These extraordinary mechanics made it possible to unload 4 million tons of equipment, 500,000 vehicles, and 2.5 million men around the clock, despite the storm on June 19th, which swept away one of the two harbors. In early July, Eisenhower reproaches Montgomery for halting at Caen. He criticizes his inefficient operations and their high casualty rate. Montgomery says Eisenhower belongs to another world and another century. Eisenhower can't stand to see Montgomery posing with his fox terrier named Hitler and his cocker spaniel named Rommel, which he takes everywhere, along with his canaries. In Caen, the wounded pile up. Heroic nurses care for all, both enemies and friends. Everything in this tragedy is organized. For the English, Sid Millward's jazz band, the best in London. For the Americans, movie star Marlene Dietrich, a German who obtained American citizenship and has consistently fought against Hitler. Hollywood director George Stevens is called in to show the world how well Montgomery and the Americans get along, including famous General George Patton, who actually despises him. But public opinion needs reassurance, and Montgomery decorates American General Norman Cota, who led one of the decisive assaults on Omaha Beach. However, it is Patton who leads the decisive victory. He makes a swift breakthrough in Coutances and Avranches. The Germans around Caen retreat. During the rainy summer, on the road to Gisors, Hitler's soldiers pass the house of Monsieur Bignon, an amateur cinematographer who dares film them. This unique document shows the Germans leaving and the British tanks arriving immediately on their heels. On August 6th, 2 months after D-Day, Eisenhower expresses his satisfaction and makes a show of strength. He can move on to the second phase of Operation Overlord, which planned for a landing in the south, in Provence, at the same time as Normandy. The phase had been delayed due to the lack of ships. His goal is to take the ports of Toulon and Marseille, then move north to meet up with the armies coming from Normandy and catch the Germans in a chokehold. Aboard the battleship Lorraine, General de Gaulle, who has fought so hard to ensure that France is liberated as much as possible by the French, gives a decisive boost to his restored, modernized navy and his newly reunited, re-equipped army. The former Expeditionary Corps in Italy, which contributed to Rome's liberation, joins the First French Army. The African army prepares to cross the Mediterranean. They converge on Provence from all over the French colonial empire. Africa, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. There are 230,000 of them, whereas the Americans and the British number 100,000. The mood on these French ships is solemn. For these women and men, this is a return to their homeland, defeated and humiliated in June 1940. Their commander, Jean de Latte de Tassigny, one of the few victorious generals of 1940, had escaped from occupied France, as did 20,000 of his soldiers. De Latte says, "It's an unforgettable sight. 2,000 ships and land straight ahead." "Nancy has a stiff neck" is repeated throughout the night on London radio. This message warns of the Provence landings and arms deliveries to the resistance fighters. The number of fighters grows daily, as does their appeal to the ladies. They too bravely fight all over France. Like 19-year-old Simone Seguin, heroine of the Francs-Tireurs and the communist partisans, wearing the machine gun she took from an SS. American, British, and French paratroopers jumped deep into the hills of Grimaud, in the backcountry of the Var region, to block the arrival of German reinforcements. At dawn, a commando of Algerian volunteers from Oran stormed the German bunkers at Cape Negre. 1/3 of the First Army is made up of the men known as the Pieds Noirs, like 18-year-old Lucien Garcia. He recalls, "Until 1962, I laid flowers on the graves in Algeria of 2 of my buddies who set foot on French soil for only a few hours, the final hours of their lives." The landing craft moved towards the beaches, but this time, it's not Arromanches, it's Saint-Tropez. The American 3rd Infantry Division and the 1st Free French Division set foot on French soil on 18 different beaches, from Saint Raphael to Saint Maxime and Cavalaire. Some beaches are better defended than others. In Provence, the Allies suffer close to 10,000 casualties. At the same time, Churchill delivers a stirring speech in the House of Commons. He says, "What a magnificent thing it is to be French today, to be 20 years old, and to take back your country." Among the sharpshooters, Frantz Fanon, 19, a young soldier from the West Indies, explains why he enlisted. "Whenever human freedom and dignity are in question, we are all concerned, whether we are white, black, or yellow. Yet we are confronted with ethnic discrimination and narrow nationalism. "20 years later, Frantz Fanon will become the proponent of anti-colonialism within the National Liberation Front, fighting for Algeria's independence. Many of these riflemen go on to be the NLF's leaders and soldiers. But in August 1944, on the road to Marseille, General de Montsabert, the beloved and respected head of the 3rd Algerian Infantry Division, declares, "We must recognize the extraordinary symbiosis achieved within the African army between the French and North Africans. The French army represented an ideal." The Tunisian Lieutenant El Hajj died shouting, "Long live France!" Cogolan wasn't on the coast, says Algerian infantryman Alan Mimoun, the future Olympic marathon champion. He had been wounded in Italy and nearly had his foot amputated. It still caused him pain. He says, "We had to walk 18 miles with packs on our backs, but afterward, we celebrated." The French were truly happy. Entire German units surrendered to the regular army rather than fall into the hands of the resistance. When Marseille is liberated in August 1944, the FFI, French Forces of the Interior, plays its part. Many are last-minute soldiers who shave the heads of women suspected of horizontal collaboration with the enemy. Scores are settled between resistance fighters of all political persuasions, and traitors are executed without trial. When General de Gaulle walks down the Champs-Élysées on August 26th in liberated Paris, he realizes the extent of the task ahead. He must restore order and rebuild the country. But for the moment, the joy of the liberation prevails. In September 1944, General Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division, coming from Normandy, meets up with the 1st Free French Division heading up from Provence. The French liberation cost the lives of 40,000 Allied soldiers, 60,000 Germans, and 70,000 civilians. It left 300,000 homeless. Churchill says, exhausted, impoverished, but triumphant, we experienced a moment that touched the sublime. Captain Dawson of Omaha Beach says, D-Day was perhaps the most dramatic moment of the 20th century because it enabled the freedom of the world. There's something sacred about it. Jacqueline Pardon, a resistance fighter, says, to have lived through it is an extraordinary opportunity. It matters more than the rest of your life.